What if the reason you could survive a disease that wiped out a third of Europe has nothing to do with medicine, and everything to do with a pile of corpses from 700 years ago? Somewhere in your own DNA, there are scars left behind by plagues that emptied cities. Some of those scars are still active, still deciding who lives and who dies in outbreaks happening right now. We start at the Black Death. We end with the disease your genome might be quietly beating today, this year, without a single doctor involved. Here's the part nobody explains properly. A plague isn't just a tragedy. Biologically, it's a filter. When half a population dies from the same pathogen, the survivors aren't a random sample anymore. They're the ones whose bodies happen to fight that specific enemy a little better, and every child born after that catastrophe inherits a gene pool that's been brutally, mathematically edited. That's not a metaphor. That's population genetics, and it means the worst events in human history may have been quietly writing instructions into human bodies that are still being read out today. The Black Death is where this story gets its clearest evidence. Between 1347 and 1351, it killed an estimated 30 to 50% of Europe's population. In 2022, a team led by researcher Jennifer Klunk examined DNA from centuries-old burial pits in London and found something remarkable. A gene called ERAP2, involved in how immune cells recognize invaders, showed up far more often in people who died after the plague than in people who died during it. Survivors with that gene variant were roughly 40% more likely to live through infection. Their descendants inherited it in bulk. That sounds like a clean success story. It isn't. The very same ERAP2 variant that helped medieval Europeans survive Yersinia pestis is now linked to a sharply higher risk of Crohn's disease and other autoimmune disorders in people alive today. Natural selection doesn't optimize you for comfort. It optimizes you for surviving whatever is currently trying to kill you, and it doesn't care what bill gets left for your descendants centuries later. So, if the Black Death rewrote one gene with a hidden cost, what happened when the next plague arrived and rewrote another? Smallpox is the next chapter, and it ran for far longer than any single outbreak. For over 1,000 years, it killed roughly 30% of everyone it infected, generation after generation, which means it had far more time to shape the human genome than the Black Death ever did. Populations with long, continuous exposure to smallpox show measurable shifts in immune-related genes compared to populations that encountered it late, including parts of the Americas where it arrived with devastating, one-sided force. Different plague, different timeline, same underlying mechanism, quietly repeating itself. But plagues aren't only about viruses that came and went. Some pathogens never left, and that changes the selection pressure entirely. Malaria has been killing humans in parts of Africa for tens of thousands of years, continuously, which is why the sickle cell trait exists at all. One copy of the sickle-shaped hemoglobin gene makes red blood cells inhospitable to the malaria parasite. 2 copies causes a painful, life-shortening disease. That's not a flaw in evolution's design. That's evolution making the least bad trait available when the alternative is child mortality on a massive scale. Here's where the story stops being ancient history. That same trade-off logic is still running live-ly in gene pools today because malaria never stopped applying pressure. And it turns out the Black Death may have left behind more than one legacy. A mutation called CCR5 delta 32 blocks a protein that certain pathogens use as a door into human cells. For years, researchers debated whether it was the plague, or smallpox, or something else entirely that pushed this mutation to unusually high frequencies in parts of Northern Europe. What's not in dispute is what that same mutation does for a completely different disease, one that didn't exist when the mutation first spread. People who inherit 2 copies of CCR5 delta 32 are almost completely resistant to HIV because the virus can't get through the door that gene normally leaves open. A mutation that may have been shaped by a medieval plague is, right now, protecting a small percentage of the world's population from a disease discovered in the 1980s. It's the closest thing biology has to a gene showing up centuries early for a fight nobody had scheduled yet. So if that happened once, quietly, what else might be happening right now that we simply haven't noticed yet? Because that pattern isn't unique to Europe. In parts of West and Central Africa, a genetic trait called Duffy-negativity, near universal in some populations, blocks a specific malaria parasite from entering red blood cells at all. In coastal populations exposed for generations to waterborne cholera, Researchers studying communities along the Ganges Delta have found gene variants tied to reduced susceptibility to the toxin cholera produces. Different continents, different pathogens, different timelines, but the exact same underlying signature: mass death leaving a genetic fingerprint on whoever's left standing. Which raises the obvious problem with how most people think about evolution. It's usually pictured as something that finished a long time ago, back when humans were still figuring out fire and tools. But every one of these examples happened after agriculture, after cities, after written history began. Evolution didn't wrap up in some prehistoric past. It has been actively mid-sentence for the entire span of recorded human civilization, and plagues have been one of its most brutal editors the whole time. Which means the real question isn't what plagues did to ancient humans. It's what's happening to living humans right now, in populations still being shaped this same way. Roughly 20% of people carry a genetic variant that makes them Non-Secretors, which blocks Norovirus and certain strains of rotavirus from attaching to their gut lining at all. During the COVID-19 pandemic, researchers identified a gene called OAS1, inherited from Neanderthals, that measurably reduced the risk of severe illness in people who carried it. That gene didn't appear because of COVID. It was already sitting there, waiting for a use. So if norovirus resistance and Neanderthal-inherited COVID protection are already circulating quietly in living people, the plague and selection machine hasn't slowed down at all. It's simply moved to diseases with names we recognize from the news instead of names we recognize from history books. And there's one current example that shows this process happening in close to real time, in a population being tracked by scientists as it unfolds. In parts of Nigeria, researchers studying Lassa fever, a hemorrhagic disease endemic to West Africa, have found genetic signatures around a receptor gene that show clear, ongoing selection pressure in living populations today. People carrying certain variants are less likely to develop severe disease when infected, and because Lassa fever has killed people in these regions for generations, the same brutal filtering process that followed the Black Death is running right now, in real time, in people who are alive this year. The plague changes. The mechanism that built you never has. That's the whole loop. Mass death writes into the genome carries the memory forward, and somewhere it finds a new use nobody could have predicted. If this kind of history is the kind of thing you want more of, there's another one just like it waiting on screen right now. Thanks for watching, and go ahead and tell us in the comments what you want us to dig into next.